Ketchup is without a doubt the king of condiments. And why is it so popular and versatile? Well, it's sweet, it's salty, and it's acidic, which means it covers off on all 3 points of the seasoning triangle. So what can you do to make this any better? Well, you can add some spice. Nothing too crazy, this isn't a hot sauce recipe. For this, we just want a nice subtle background heat to liven up this simple sauce and make the flavors shine. Let's get snacking. The ingredients for ketchup are pretty straightforward. We're going to need some tomatoes, the riper and juicier the better. Canned tomatoes also work really well for this. We'll also need some basic dried spices and some chilies. You can scale this recipe up or down to suit your needs, but I've got about 2 kilos of tomatoes, and this recipe should give me around about 2 liters of sauce, give or take. So I'm just cutting those into rough chunks and putting them in a food processor. I've only got this mini chopper, so I'm doing this in batches, but if you've got a full-size food processor, you can probably do this all in one go. And it doesn't need to be super smooth at this point. It'll break down further as it cooks, and then we'll puree it again at the end to get it silky smooth. And as I go, I'm tipping those into a medium-sized saucepan. Then onto the spicy stuff. I've got some fresh chilies from my garden, nothing too hot. Right here I've got 1 Fresno and about 6 small serranos. You can use any kind of chilies that you like, but obviously the hotter the chili, the hotter the sauce. So you can adjust the type and quantity of chili to suit your tastes, but for me, this should be enough to give it just a subtle background heat. You can also use dried chilies, they work perfectly fine too, or you can always use chili powder or cayenne pepper to taste. And I'm just roughly chopping these. Again, they'll cook down and get pureed at the end, so we don't need to be too fussy about size or shape. And to bring together all of the flavors while it cooks, I like to add a few bay leaves. If you don't have a portal to the bay leaf dimension in your kitchen, you could consider planting a bay tree. They're quite easy to look after and grow really well in pots, or you could go to the store and buy some dried ones. They work just fine too. I'm now adding a cup of white vinegar, followed by a 1/4 cup of brown sugar. If you like your ketchup a little bit sweeter or tangier, you can adjust these to taste. Then in go the chili and the bay leaves, followed by the dry spices. Give that a bit of a mix to combine, and then turn up the heat and bring it to a boil. Whoops, and don't forget the salt. While that's heating, I'm adding in about a teaspoon of salt. We'll taste the sauce once it's cooked and add a little bit more salt if we think it needs it. And to round out the seasoning, I'm also going in with a generous crank of freshly ground black pepper. Once it's up to a boil, reduce the heat to medium just to make sure that it doesn't boil over, and then we're going to let it cook down. How long you need to cook it is going to depend a lot on how juicy your tomatoes are. As you can see at this stage, mine's still looking pretty watery, so I'm going to need to boil this down quite a bit before it's ready. This is how mine looked after about half an hour. As you can see, it's reduced down by about 1 inch. It's still a little bit on the watery side, but I think once we blend through all those chunks, it'll actually be about right. If you like a thicker ketchup, just reduce it a little bit more. And remember, if you're not happy with the consistency after it's pureed, you can always cook it on and reduce it down a little bit more. So now before I blend it, I'm going to remove the bay leaves. To make this easier, you can tie them to a string before you throw them in, but then you don't get to play this fun game of hide and seek in a pot of scalding hot liquid. And where's the fun in that? So there's 1 and 2 and having a little trouble finding the third. Never mind, I'll leave it. I'm going to pass this through a strainer to get rid of any chunks anyway. Then we need to blitz it until it's nice and smooth. You can do this in a blender, although do be careful blending hot liquids. You might want to let it cool for a little bit first, but I like to use a stick blender straight into the cooking pot. So in terms of thickness, I think this looks about where I want it. It's a little bit runny still, but it will thicken up a little bit more when it's cool. You can always use the old back of the spoon test, where you draw a line with your finger across the back of the spoon, and if there's no drips, then it should be thick enough. Oh God, that's hot. To help keep the sauce stable, while I'm blending, I'm adding a tiny bit of xanthan gum. This is about 1/8 of a teaspoon. What this will do is slightly thicken and give it a really nice glossy texture and stop the liquids and the solids from separating in the bottle, which happens sometimes if it sits on the shelf for a while. The next step is to pass it through a sieve to get out any remaining chunks and seeds. This will leave us with a smooth and luscious sauce. Then I'm pouring about half of this into a squeezy bottle, which I'm going to keep in the fridge. And it should last in the fridge pretty well for at least a few weeks. Although to be honest, I have left this for significantly longer and not encountered any spoilage. The remainder I'm pouring into a snap-lock bag to freeze for later use. This ketchup freezes quite well, but when it thaws out, you might want to give it another quick blitz in a blender or with the stick mixer just to get everything nicely combined again. And lastly, slather the sauce generously on anything that needs a sweet, salty, tangy, and slightly spicy boost. For a significantly spicier sauce, check out this video, and until next time, happy snacking.